1, 2, 3. When anyone hears me or sees me, let me know. Testing. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Escape conditioning for you and me. Are we live? Give me a thumbs up. If anyone... Oh, I am live. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's stream. Today, what we are learning about is an introduction to escape conditioning and how we use it in obedience. So let's go over our objectives for the lecture. What we're going to learn today is specifically what is escape conditioning, why wait until phase 2 to teach it. Next, why do we want to teach leash mechanics before we go into phase 2? Also, what is a great command structure to use for teaching escape conditioning, and why? When can we move forward from escape conditioning, and what do some examples look like? So we have a lot to cover, but I have to tell you, I believe this is one of the most important lectures. And for me, I believe understanding escape conditioning is one of the major things that a professional dog trainer needs to really get a good grasp on in order to be a humane trainer, give a good service to the public and their dogs, enjoy training, and to make the profession a much more respected profession with standards. So this is a very important lecture. So pay attention. There's a lot of little details here, but let's chip away at them over here. The first thing is, what is escape conditioning? Because we hear this is escape conditioning, and you'll see avoidance conditioning actually in our dog training checklist over here. And we want to know what the concepts here is. So escape conditioning technically is the process of teaching the dog to escape an aversive that we later want them to avoid. So an aversive is anything that the dog really dislikes, would rather not be involved in, wants to avoid, wants to get rid of. So it's the process of teaching them how to escape an aversive. So later they know how to avoid it, and there's not going to be any panic at all. Very important. As professionals, we want to make this as smooth of a process as possible. Now, when we're doing escape condition, it focuses on the negative reinforcement aspect of the training, but it is not a synonym for negative reinforcement. So we're teaching the dog, when we have a finished dog, and there is a time where the dog may receive an aversive during training, we want to make sure that they know how to escape it. And the negative reinforcement part is we're teaching them how to remove something. That's the negative. And the reinforcement is to encourage behavior. All right. That's the negative that's the negative reinforcement aspect of it. And that's what we're teaching them. We're teaching them how to remove something to encourage a behavior. But the reasons why it's not the same thing as negative reinforcement is you are actually the escape condition. Some people don't have a handle on this. It's a process. It's the process of teaching them that. So when you're teaching a dog how to escape something to encourage behavior, you can use all quadrants of operant conditioning in the process. And we're going to go a little more detail into it. Like, let's get really nerdy about this, because the more you understand it, the better that you're going to be able to apply it correctly. So during the process, we are going to be using we do use, especially when we're teaching during the lesson, we're going to be using positive reinforcement and negative punishment, which is everything we've been doing so far in phase one, right? In phase one, in pure phase one, there's absolutely no aversives. There's no positive punishment or negative reinforcement, all right? So we have a whole video on operant conditioning that you can go by. But layman's terms is we're focusing on just giving and taking away things that the dog likes over here. And we want the client to really master everything that they can do in phase one. In phase two now, we are going to start introducing the concepts of aversives to the dog. Now, in the teaching process, you're going to see we're still going to be doing phase one while we're teaching the dog how to do this. And there is going to be positive punishment, but technically, from a technical point of view, punishment is only punishment if it discourages behavior. But you're going to see in the process, even though we're going to do things that would look like the definition of positive punishment, is we're going to be adding things, aversives, that would normally discourage behavior. We are going to, this is the art of dog training, you're going to make judgments so it is not so aversive that the dog is really pushing to avoid it, if that makes sense. So it's generally when we're using negative reinforcement, which we're focusing on, it goes hand in hand with positive punishment, right? What we add for discouraging a behavior is what we take away to then encourage the behavior. But since we need the dog to learn how to remove aversives, we do not want the dog to be walking on eggshells because they're scared to get the aversive in the first place. So we're making things very, very mild. You are going to see it is really about being a teacher. And what I have here, I'm going to keep stressing this. This was a game changer for me once I figured it out as a professional dog trainer. So bear with me over here. All right. Now, this is going to come before we do avoidance conditioning, is because when we're using aversives in dog training, we want them to understand it before we want them to avoid it, or else we get side effects. We get side effects of basically panic and all we can get fight or flight if they do not understand what they're supposed to be avoiding. If we do escape conditioning correctly, the dog is confident. The training is smooth. You do not have bad lessons. An analogy that I am going to show you is, we'll do a couple analogies over here. I like the quicksand or broken ice. You go on a pond, broken ice, right? If someone just tells you, all right, don't go on a pond while the ice is melting, or don't avoid quicksand, if you didn't know what to do when you fell in quicksand or fell into a pond, you would probably panic when you went in there, and you would make the situation worse. But if you learned first, if you happen to make a mistake and fall in broken ice, this is what you do. You lay yourself flat, you get your arms out, you kick your legs, and if you learn how to do it, if you make that mistake and you fall into the ice, you're going to be calmer. You're going to be able to think. It's not going to be as big of a deal, okay? Speeding tickets. If you know before you even get your driver's license that if you get a speeding ticket, it sucks, but it's not that big of a deal. You usually have to just go to court and pay it. You're not going to jail. You're not going to something horrible isn't going to necessarily happen to you just because you ran that stop sign. You're less likely to go into a panic and run away from the police officer or attack the police officer, right? Escape conditioning is a good thing. And when we do not understand it and we remove it from our training programs, you will 100% get side effects from it. one of the examples that I'll give you is and shows the evolution of dog training is there's a book very popular, was very popular. It's an older book, the William Keeler book. This one's a training guard dogs, but it has the obedience section. William Keeler was a very, very influential dog trainer, and a lot of trainers still follow guidelines that originated from this book. But just to prove my point, is I'm just going to read very short part of the book over here. Is William Keeler, even though he was a very respected trainer and at the time, and people were mimicking his book, if you understand escape conditioning is really not part of the training process for him. And because of that, it was normal for him just teaching normal obedience, just obedience for a dog, for dogs to go into fight or flight and cause them to attack them basically during training, to the point where even in his book where he recommends, where he's dealing with it by hanging dogs and hitting the dogs with, in the book, with wooden dowels with rubber over it, hitting them over the head. But when you read the book, you realize is that these were confused dogs that were going into fight or flight. It's one of the major reasons why dogs go into fight or flight during obedience. There are other reasons why, but if you read and he says, he talks about how to hang dogs or, hit them over the head when they try to bite you during training. And he says, I have dealt with hundreds of these protest biters. And I must say under oath that even the ones that would appear to, and he talks about, how he hung the dogs. So if we have a trainer that is hanging and hitting dogs over the head with hundreds of dogs that he trained, it shows that it's something in the training process that is a problem that was probably missing. All right. So this is something that's missing from a lot of training. And I spent thousands and thousands of dollars, even went away to a dog training school and did not really learn about escape conditioning, especially incorporated into the obedience aspect of it. So go back over here to my notes over here, is why are we going to wait into phase 2 to teach escape conditioning? Now, you see over here, escape conditioning is I want the clients to understand this, to get a grip on. I want the dogs to have a grip on this before we go into escape conditioning. It does not mean that you have to have all the commands you're going to teach the dog done in phase 1 before you go into phase 2. It just means the dog needs to understand the phase 1 for that particular behavior before you go into phase 2, and then it makes things easy. One of the things you're going to see, and we're going to watch video examples, is one of the things that you're going to see is if the dog understands the word first because you taught it to them, and they don't need prompting. You don't have to point to the ground or do something. They know. If that dog knows what sit means, what down means, what come means, what heel means, like we've seen in the previous lessons, when we are teaching them what to do with an aversive, we can calmly tell them what we want from them as we're doing it. And then that helps them do what we want them to do. We can talk to the dog, right? We can talk to the dog. We can teach the dog, and it's going to help. The other thing that you're going to see is that when we do the phase 1 first, it's going to give us quality control. It's going to give us quality control because we can do an obedience session with the dog, and we start it, we're doing phase 1. And then you're going to see we enter every exercise phase 1 style with rewards, and we're exiting each command phase 1 style on a reward schedule. We're only going to be teaching the negative reinforcement aspect within each command, which you're going to see. And if the dog is too stressed out by the training, they will not want to participate. So it gives us a gauge. It gives the client an easy gauge, even if they're not masters of body language, to see if they are doing a good job at making the lesson, making the lesson in such a way that the dog is still enjoying it, wants to engage, and does not mind learning the negative reinforcement aspect to it. So that is why we want to do, ideally, the phase 1 first. Now, it does not mean that you cannot teach escape conditioning to a dog with an exercise without doing a complete phase 1. But when dealing with the most difficult commands, difficult dogs, I promise you through my experience is I'm teaching you a way that works for all dogs. All right. So if you train every dog like it's the most difficult dog, the training always goes smooth, right? It always goes smooth. So it's a good foundation to start with. It's a good blueprint to start with. And then it becomes, you modify as necessary. But remember, we're built upon a Lima model. So this will teach you how to be least intrusive, minimally aversive, if we go into this aspect of the training. All right, and it's going to move down over here. All right. So first things first. I'm not going to watch this whole video for sure. Is you can do a lot of phase 1 training without ever putting a leash on the dog. So you can have clients do it in their house. They could do it in the yard. It's one less thing they really need to learn. And I prefer people start off without using a leash whenever possible when they're practicing. But when you're starting to teach aversives, you need to be smooth with that leash in order to have communication. So be sure, if you are going to do this, that you, at the very least, I'll update. This is a 9-year-old video, but it's still pretty good and accurate. I will be doing an updated video on it too. Is watch some little Leash Ninja, right? Here, I'll show you really quick what we're talking about here, right? Is you want to be able to be nice and smooth with the leash. When you're smooth with the leash, it's one less thing we have to deal with. All right, it's one less thing we have to deal with, and it allows our timing to be good. It allows it to be smooth. It makes it easier for the client to be able to juggle, handle rewards, and the leash, pet their dog. You do not want them fumbling around with the leash. And it is easier to stay accurate with minimal amount of aversives, right? If you know how to handle that leash, you can do everything you need with a dog for training without ever needing to jolt them, jerk them, or whatever. Matter of fact is I'm generally using fingers, just using my fingers to use the leash to deliver any type of aversive to the dog. So a shortcut to this video is, as I have a shortcut to it because it's so important, it's just leashninja.com. You go to leashninja.com, it always brings you to that video if you can't find it. Now, next thing, before we get to the videos over here, is added benefits to working on the added benefits to this stage of the training is that, one, it allows us, the lessons also teach the dog tactile cues. So they're learning a cue, because you're going to see this is not bad that we're doing to the dog. It's pretty gentle to the dog. They're confused. Most dogs are confused at first when you're trying to teach them a new aversive. But once you teach it to them, because it's used to encourage, all right? We're focusing on negative reinforcement. Remember, negative reinforcement means to encourage. So it's used for teaching things. So we can do things with the leash and do mild discomfort that the dog learns to do certain movements or commands to escape it. Similar to someone riding a horse, right? And they do things with the reins, and it goes this way, it's a little uncomfortable. The horse moves that way, it goes away. You could end up doing the same thing with the dog, And the dogs don't even really mind it if you do it the right way and you do what I say, and it becomes something that can be used as an extra cue for deaf dogs if they can't hear commands, for blind dogs if you again if you would know if you'd want to do a um, you want to if you can't do a hand signal, you want to do something with the hand signal, you could do something like that. It works good in tactical situations for working dogs and stuff like that. If there's a police officer or someone in the military, so anyway, they don't want to give away their position, they don't want to talk loud, they can take the leash and they can use negative reinforcement to encourage the dog to change behaviors that they've learned through the proper use of escape conditioning or understanding how to do escape conditioning. So there's all these other benefits to it. Also, what we get is you always hear this in dog training. We have the famous 3Ds of dog training. Right? You always hear distance, duration, distractions. It's going to, because technically is what we're on, is we're on this puts us on another conjunctive schedule, meaning it's another conjunctive schedule reinforcement. Up to this point, remember, no one should, if someone's watching this video and they have not watched those phase 1 videos, you're not going to get the most from this video. If you have watched up to this point, you have schedules of reinforcement within the commands where you're encouraging the dog. You also have schedules of reinforcement after durations where they could get different types of reinforcement. This also adds another type of reinforcement, adding the negative reinforcement. It's another schedule of reinforcement, 3 that are now surrounding this dog, helping the dog to encourage behavior. And you will see it makes the process, it makes it much easier to go quicker, especially when you start introducing distractions and you want the dog to do a little bit longer durations. That's why if someone, for a professional dog trainer, if you're doing in kennel or you're working with a client that's on a budget, you will see, you gauge that dog's body language, you gauge what they're doing, you will be able to train the dog quicker and humanely, and the dog has a great understanding, if your timing is right, by adding this whole third schedule of reinforcement into the picture. And we're not even done yet. After we're doing the escape conditioning, we're just getting started in teaching the phase 2 part of the training. So let's check some of this out here. All right, this right here is our full command structure. This is what we're building. This is what we're building with the dog. And don't worry if you don't understand it up to this point, because we're building it. It gets built through our checklist. Now, to give you a little bit more of a visual, in phase 1, this is really what it looks like. Like, this is the stuff that we really taught the dog and the client in phase 1. And this does not seem as difficult to understand. It's like, okay, we can read this and it makes a little bit more sense, all right? This is what we've done so far. When we're doing just phase 1, positive reinforcement, negative punishment, this is what we've been doing, right? Saying the dog's name, give them the command. If they don't do it, right? No, right? We just go back over here to the beginning. That's why I did it. If they did do it, right? We praise them, we mark it, and we're using the variable schedules that we learned about at this point. All right, and then we start with the new exercise. But the only thing that happens if they don't obey is we just say no. All right, so think of this. All right, highlight here. The dog doesn't know better at this point if you trained them. If you've gotten this far, you've done a great job at teaching the dog what you want, and the dog has a great job of learning those rules. There is nothing yet in the process that taught the dog that they have to be reliable, that the only option for not obeying is they just start back over, right? And because this is what we're teaching the dog, and this is what we're teaching the client. We're teaching them to know this first, to know why it's good, before we go into the other part of the training. So dog's not doing anything wrong. If someone's having trouble with this, it's a great time to teach them about, right, establishing operations and the environment, knowing your competing motivators, is they're learning so much about the dog at this point. But here is where we start escape conditioning. We do something a little different. All right, notice I wiped out this whole last row over here. All right, because it's too complicated. You don't want to teach the client this. You don't want to worry about this with the dog until the dog understands their escape conditioning. Now, I love this. I love this. All right, this is one of my favorite things as a professional that I like to teach clients, because it's saved so much grief for so many dogs and even the owners. Is here, what we're going to do, and we're going to see it in action, is we start the same way with the dog. Once we go into phase 2, we say the dog's name and we give them a command. If they don't do it, we're not using an aversive. They don't want to do it. That's on us. All right. We want the client to never forget that it's important to understand the reward schedules and the phase 1. We do not want them to leave it out of the training. We don't want them to leave it behind. They don't ever graduate from phase 1 and now the dog has to do things just because it has to. All right. We smoothly teach. We glide into the aversives. It's a smooth process, and we want the dog to still enjoy it. If the dog does not do the command, we just keep starting over, all right, until we have everything right where the dog wants to engage with the training. Then what happens, it's the same thing. They go into it. We're going to do our praise. We're going to mark it. We're going to do the same reward schedules. The difference here now is we're working on durations, right? We learned the durations at the end of phase 1. Is if the dog does not stay in the duration that you want, what you're then going to do is then we're going to repeat the command with proper correction. So this is the process part. Now, by correction, I mean to correct, to show what's right. We're showing the dog what is right. Remember, you have to, at this stage, so many people have so many different ideas about aversives and what it is. Understand in its raw form what it is and what we're doing technically, all right? The dog, we got the dog doing something. We're giving the dog rewards. We also want to teach the dog, if you remain in that position to the end, the duration, you're going to get more rewards, or you may get released, pre-mech principle, you're going to be play or something. Now, the dog breaks the position, all right? We're going to correct. We're going to show the dog what's correct, right? We're going to put the dog back in the position as quick as possible. So then, right after we correct the dog, look, we go right back to marking and saying, okay, you're now doing right. Good boy, good girl, whatever it is. And we're back to rewards. And if the dog remains for the amount of time that you want, then we could start back to the beginning. We could say the dog's name, go to a new command, or we can release it. But at this point, this is where us and the clients gauge how well of a teacher we are. If we say, give the dog another command, and the dog just does not want to engage with us, guess what? We're not going to make them do it. The dog has to willingly engage with us because they know that they're still going to get something good, all right? At this stage, we do not want to make it mandatory that the dog has to obey or else there's an aversive. If the dog does not want to obey and continue, we have to troubleshoot, all right? Are we using the right training collar for the dog? Is it too aversive? There's a bunch of things that you can really troubleshoot, but we stay within this cycle over here of showing the dog what to do. And I'm going to show you, and this is basically escape conditioning. At this stage, this is where the escape conditioning happens over here. We're showing how to escape. Then we move over here and we do the cycle, okay? So let's watch this. I put a few videos over here. I got tons of videos. It's incorporated into everything because it's so important. But I want to show you in action because this can potentially be, I think the escape conditioning is one of the higher skill level portions of training the dog in order for it to be smooth, but one of the most important and the most stressful. I think it's the most stressful for everyone. Why we need the professional, but if you do it right, it's not that bad. And generally, it doesn't take very long. And we're not talking about, right, this is a general escape conditioning lecture. So I'm not talking about how to do every single command on how to do it or how to do it with every different type of collars. But technically, these same concepts apply no matter what type of training collar you're going to use. All right. So it could be anything. I'm going to show a video here. I'm going to have a halty type of collar, a harness. We have star mark in the other videos, but I have videos that show prong collar. You can do it on, precision collars. You could do it on any collar, really any type of collar. The same concepts apply. All right. So here, watch what we have over here with Teresa. This is just one of the instructional videos we have on YouTube where Teresa is doing a escape conditioning on the down with Gypsy, with our German Shepherd Gypsy. So it's the first stage in phase 2.
Down by teaching the correction through escape conditioning. You're going to put your dog in the down using phase 1 technique. Gypsy, down. Good girl.
Okay. So right there, you see it starts off positive reinforcement. Now, let's just watch her. She'd better talk to me anyway.
Good girl. If your dog gets up, you're going to repeat the command down and then use a freehand finger lock or thumb lock to apply steady downward pressure beneath your dog's chin. Remember to praise your dog once they're back in position.
Okay, so now you see why you want to make sure your client understands to handle the leash, all right? Make sure they know how to handle a leash before you're doing this. She's going to say the dog's name to make it easier. So the dog, because this is a halty, all right? So halty is, there's pros and cons to every type of collar, all right? In my opinion, the halty, there's a lot of good about the halty, especially if someone, has a big dog and you get a lot of leverage with those things. But I think they're more uncomfortable for the average dog, and you can get more panic doing certain exercises with the dog with these if you don't understand the concept of escape conditioning. A lot of people use like these halties or gentle leaders or these type of collars as just sort of, they get the dog used to it, and they're mostly using it for pulling, all right? But you can see here, it can be used for teaching the down. And if she's not making it easy for the dog, this could turn into a big mess. So notice that she is down with the dog, all right? The dog is in the position already. Anytime you're doing escape conditioning, you want to make it as easy as possible for the dog to figure it out. So if you're using escape conditioning to teach a dog how to escape an aversive when they're in the down, make sure the dog is in the down, because then as soon as they break, it is easy to put them right back in. It's easier for them to figure it out. If the dog is in a sit, make sure they're in the sit first. That's why we do it this way. And then when they go to break, they're not completely out of the sit. You make it really, really quick for the dog. If you're teaching the dog a first aversives for heel, make sure the dog is in the heel position first. And it is so easy when they just even get an inch out of position to show them when the aversive is there. It's very easy to get them right back over there, so you don't have to panic. The more the dog is incorrect and way out of position, the more work it is for you to teach the dog how to get back, and the more stressful it could potentially be for the dog. So everything, a common thing with escape conditioning, a rule no matter what you're doing, is always try to start off with the dog in the position to make it as easy as possible for the dog to get back into the position. Now you're going to see here when this dog breaks, Teresa is in a position to make it very easy for this dog to go back in. Now if she just hold the dog down and the dog didn't down, and she just put pressure on a halty collar, believe me, the dog was going to panic, all right? The dog was going to panic. Let's watch Teresa here.
Down. Good girl. Good girl. girl. Good girl. If your dog is not responding to the correction after a few seconds, you may have to use a treat simultaneously with the pressure to help your dog figure out how to get rid of the correction. The quicker that you're able to apply the correction, the easier it will be for your dog to understand to move back into position. Ideally, we want to correct our dog before they're in the standing position with their elbows locked. Gypsy, down. Good girl. Good girl. One way you can be in position to deliver a quick correction is to be kneeling or crouching down next to your dog. You can have your hand already in the locked position, but remember not to apply tension on the leash unless your dog moves out of position. Down. Good girl, good girl, good girl, good girl. Good girl. Free.
All right. Okay, so there's other ways to do it. This video shows alternative methods, but the idea there is, if you see the dog, and here is you can have the dog. She has this puppy engaging. The puppy is going to still engage and learn what that aversive is, and volunteer to keep engaging with Teresa in there. Now I'm going to show you some other ones. All right, this is more. Here's one that I was doing at the Paladin Center, all right? And these were some young pit bulls that we were working with to show something that could be very, very, very common, all right? It shows how you have to be quick and how it could be a little tricky, especially if the dogs get a chance to lock out their elbows. Now, the idea here is to see these dogs do not know what this means. Like I'm using the down because this is one of the harder ones. The sits, almost everything else is easier. The down, I would say, is one of the most difficult ones, and also ones before I really learned escape conditioning, which I had to figure it out for myself for the most part, caused me the most grief when I was a professional dog trainer, where I would teach the dog down. They knew what the word down meant, and then it went right to avoidance conditioning the way that I was taught. The way most of the old books taught, the way the dog training schools were teaching. So if the dog did not go into a down at that point, we just then applied the aversive when the dog was standing straight up. And it caused a lot more panic, and it could cause quite a lot of side effects. And you could refer even back to my story in the introduction video to the 5.0 course. I was talking about I went away to a dog training school with my American Bulldog, and they were like, all right, tell the dog sit. If he doesn't sit, apply a correction. He looked at me like, what is that? He was standing up, and they were like, just do it harder and harder. And it turned into a big panicky thing, right? And it's even worse if you have a dog that you taught the dog down. They know why they're supposed to do it. You've done that part. If you just don't do the escape conditioning phase and they're just standing up, and now I decide, okay, now when I tell the dog down, I'm going to apply this correction, whatever the correction is, whatever the aversive is, and they have to figure it out. They have much further to go. They're braced. They could spin around. It's more difficult for them to figure it out. Where usually with most dogs, you can get right on the floor with a lot of the dogs and make it really easy. Use a teacher's voice. Make sure they're taking rewards. They're volunteering to do another rep. But I like this video because it shows more realistic of how it could be not easy, right? It's not always as easy as what you saw in the Teresa video. Sometimes our timing is wrong. The dog gets up and braces himself. If my timing is way off, which sometimes could happen if I'm talking and not paying attention, sometimes it's good to just start over, all right? Let it slide and start over. But this is good because it shows a case of the dog being able to lock out and becomes a little more tricky at this point. We're going to move this to probably about here.
Down, I will give them a treat. When they go into the down, I give them a treat after I release them. This keeps them motivated enough to keep doing the exercise and learn. So with Callie, down. So she goes into the down. Good girl. Once she goes into the down, I take my hand and I go take the treats and put them over here. And I do a little finger lock right underneath the buckle. And I don't hoover over her to stress her out. I stay to the side and I pet her. And see, I'm in this finger lock. We're in the finger lock over here. And what happens when she gets up, I'm already underneath her. All I gotta do is pump my hand and keep my hand down here, and it'll pulsate this from the top, which will help her to go back into the down. But then what I also do, see, now that she's in the down, she doesn't have to go back, she doesn't have to go far to learn how to get back down when I pump. So I'll keep this hand here, petting her, so if she does break, I would just stiffen it so she can't get up and lock her elbows, and it makes it easier for her to just learn only one way to go. So I'm like this, I'll pet her. Are you jealous that your sister's over here? You're gonna lick my hands for the treats. So we need them to get up in order to learn. So if you're doing the lesson, they just stay down. We can't say, oh, she did great with the lesson, because that's not the point of this particular lesson. You want them to learn with the correction in. So what I'll do is sit down, she got up. Good girl, I pumped, and then I pet her.
Now, did you notice how easy it was to get that dog back into the down before her elbows locked out? And that's also one of the reasons, you know, that if you have a good enough bond with that dog, which is important, it's very helpful to be able to go over and pet the dog and see how I'm not really using my arm to push the dog down, because then that becomes the aversive, is I can use it to sort of block the dog to make it harder for them to lock out. And then use the pump so to encourage the dog to go back into the down, on top of I'm saying the word down. I'm telling the dog what to do too. And it's all about, once you start pumping, it's okay. This escape conditioning, right? It's a process. You're not expecting the dog to know what it to do. It's a process of teaching the dog how to escape. And that's where your artistic license of a dog trainer comes in, right? You say the name, you can take out a treat. I mean, I'm using my arm to help to block the dog, but you can also, while you're pumping, have another treat in the hand and lure the dog down while you're pumping. It doesn't really matter how you do it. We're looking for a certain result from the dog, that when they do feel that pump, the pump itself, just the stimulus of the pump, or this is a star mark collar, or the pressure from a halty collar, or whatever the sensation is supposed to be from any collar, all right, is that once they feel it, you want to see the dog on their own confidently know, oh, I just go back down into the position. All right. Now here, I think when I'm sitting here talking, the dog gets a chance to lock out, and you can see it's going to be more difficult once the dog locks out before they really understand it. So watch what happens.
Down.
Right there.
As I pump, I stay calm. Down. Good girl.
So the dog figured it out, but notice I'm still. Do you recognize phase one in there? All right. The markers, the praise, even the affection. The affection is a reward for the dog being down. Now, with escape conditioning is the point of the lesson, common mistake. The point of the lesson is not getting the dog to stay in a position because they know that there's a correction now. The point of the lesson is you need the dog to get out of position. Your only point of these lessons is that you're not teaching them to obey. You're teaching them what to do with that aversive. So you have to be very careful with the client when you show them how to do this stuff, that you don't show them it and then you see them like the following week and it's like, how the dog did. And they say, oh, the dog did great. The dog didn't even break like at all. The dog only broke the command 2 times. No, you need, here you see is, if I think the dog is going to get up on their own, I'm not going to do anything. But you may have tell them to introduce some mild distractions. Like I'll show you a video with Darcy in the yard, in the grass, where I know her. She likes to sniff around for drop treats and this and that. That you need a situation where they mess up so they can teach. You can teach the dog what to do. Now that gets us back to what I mentioned early in the lecture about escape conditioning. Is the point is we're teaching them the negative reinforcement. All right, we're teaching them we're removing something to encourage behavior. Technically, people will say, oh, but you're using positive punishment, all right? Positive punishment happens when you're adding something to discourage behavior, which eventually, when we get into phase 3, that does happen. And it happens at the times we see when I'm starting the aversive. But here in phase 2, the reason why you have to be light is you do not want the dog to be too worried to get up because they want to avoid the aversive. All right. If you go too hard and they're not moving at all because they're worried, that means you're actually doing it too much. You want to be gentle because your point in here is not teaching them how to avoid it, because then they'll stay there, but then you never, like something happened that I didn't like, but they may not really understand what to do with it. So then later on in the training process or in real life, when you need to deliver an aversive, the dog can panic, right? The dog can panic. You have to teach them this lesson. I hope that makes sense, all right? Let me see, in the comments here, I say, Judy says, also a good thing to do for the down if you're using a star mark prong type or any collar of that style is to rotate the collar so there's more surface area of the collar on the top of the neck. Yeah, good. If you notice here, is because this was one on YouTube. I have some videos on YouTube where people go on like, oh, you have I'll show you, I flipped over here. Like this one's on YouTube, like all these negative comments, the collar's on wrong, it's not high enough, it's not this. You make the collar, for every exercise you're doing, you adjust for what's going to make it easier for the dog. See, in this case, I spun the collar, all right? So there's more surface area up over here to make it easier for the dog. And a lot of these that have like links, you take one off, you make it too tight, so it's higher on the neck, which technically is the dog, it usually works a little bit better. But then if it's too tight, it's always aversive. The dog always feels the pressure, right? Too loose, it falls way down here. You got to make that judgment call. I tend, especially in these early stages, I want the collar to be comfortable for the dog. And as long as I can get it uncomfortable, just uncomfortable enough where they're going to work to avoid it, I'm happy. But yes, you could spin around the collars, all right? And it depends on what type of collar that you're using in the training process, all right? So, but this is what it looks like. There we go.
Down. Good girl. The reason why we make sure she knows what the word down means without you lowering her is because now I could help her down with my voice. Down. Good girl. She does.
So you notice how this is going, all right? And this is also why this is awesome as a professional trainer. I loved that I never had to like hide. I never had to edit my videos. Like these classes at Paladin Center, this was a huge place, very public, giant windows into our group classes, kids going around, everyone watching. It should be a bonding experience with the owner, right? We're teaching, you want when the owners are teaching their dogs that they're talking to the dogs, they're being a teacher. They're going to teach them rules that are going to make it much easier to do things around high distractions later on. All right. So, and to get an idea, let me see. This shows, I'll go to about the 6-minute mark, is you're really looking for, when the dog is sort of like ready to move on from escape conditioning. When you're doing pumps, like, they, for the most part, know what to do. All right, like watch this. Like this isn't even the same lesson here.
If she knew that exercise well, then you can go, Callie, down. And if she didn't go down, slide, bend over, and say down, and pump like this. She's going to actually do it, I think. Good girl.
Right. So you see how she's able to respond to that a lot easier, right? That's a step ahead, right? And that's probably moving a little too quick for that dog, but I was showing an example. When you do escape conditioning, right? Because if you're using a pump, for example, you give 2 pumps and the dog recognizes a sensation, they're just going to go into the position. Matter of fact, we used to just do group classes with our dogs that have known all their phase 2 stuff, where we would have the owners just not talk to their dogs at all. And I was like, everyone put their dog in a sit, and all you're going to use is tactile and love, and They would pump, the dog go in the sit, and they would love the dog up. They do pump down, the dog's going to down, they go and they would love their dog up. That's what you're looking for. You don't want to really move to another step, teaching them how to avoid these things until they're not panicked about it, right? You don't have a dog bracing themselves or squirming or anything anything like that going on. Same thing. This was just the dog's sister, same dog, right? I don't have to do all these, but it's the same thing. Sits are usually even easier to do for the dog. I'll end this with a short session with Darcy to kind of see what a session might just look like if someone understands the concept of escape conditioning and you could use it on multiple commands, right? So it's all about you're knowing where you are with the dog when you're using a checklist. And in this case with Darcy, you all saw her in we were doing the interval video. She was in there in the yard where she would break commands and stuff like that. The yard was a good place for her to be able to work on escape conditioning for her. So in this video, you'll see a little bit. I think I do some climb, some sit, some down, and a little bit of heel. But notice what we got about the command structure, okay? This is my quality control. If she doesn't want to engage, I cannot enter the cycle unless she willingly engages with me. I can't teach her the aversive unless she willingly engages with me. But because she's willingly engaged to me, I can use this to help her to do longer durations. Where normally she gets pretty distracted outside. And choose your training environment for the client or yourself so you can teach, right? You need mild distractions to do this, all right? If you cannot get the dog to go in it for the positive reinforcement, it's probably you're going too fast, too much distractions. Or you're being too aversive, all right? So this is good quality control. Let's watch a little bit of me and Darcy here. We don't have to watch the whole thing, but it'll give us an idea.
Good girl. Climb. Good girl.
So notice if at this stage, it does not matter what command she is in, I am going to be, I want her to not get off. If we're doing the climb, I don't want her to get far off of it, all right? Later on the next step, we could let her get further off. Notice too, leash handling, I'm going to be smooth. I have a star mark on her. I could literally just use a couple of fingers, I put a little bit of pressure on, and then I just pump it. Notice the interval, the rewards, I'm praising her. There's a duration where she gets the treat. So it's there's the whole command structure we have going on here.
Good girl. Good girl. Climb. Good girl. Good girl. Darcy, free. Good.
So right away it makes things a lot easier
Darcy,
when we're working with the dog. And this is also why I say it helps us to be able to speed up duration and distractions. And even things like walking circles around the dog and things like that. I could start walking circles around here where she's more likely to get off, you see? And it's just very easy for her to figure out what to do when we get the pumps. The only thing I don't really work on at this time is distance, because the dog will generally get far out of position, where we want it to be easier for the dog to get back into place. But that will be next lesson. You'll see next class we start using the markers, and if the dog, the condition punisher, and if the dog understands what to do with the escape conditioning, it's so smooth. It's so smooth from that point. I think I free her up from there, then we do some sit.
Good girl.
The other thing notice here is I'm not doing it so hard that she's scared to move. I'm not suppressing her. I purposely want her to mess up because I want her to be sure and confident that when she gets off, she feels the pump. I want to see her acting the right way, what she's supposed to do.
Darcy, free. Good girl. Darcy, sit. Good girl.
So here we have sit. Art has a good question about leash manners. I'll answer that, Art.
Sit.
It's a very good
Good
question.
girl.
So notice with the sit too, I'm not going to let her get far out of position. And it makes things easier.
Girl, what a good girl. Sit. Good girl. Good girl. Darcy, free. Good girl.
And we do it down, and then I could cut this video off. We don't have to watch the whole thing. It's the same idea. I'll show you a little bit of heel.
Good girl. Good girl.
So you go to get up. Everything's easier once you start the escape conditioning. So we got another reward schedule there.
Good
All right.
girl.
So she kind of shows an example too of where you want a dog at. You know, that's why I wanted to put the videos of those like puppies that were just learning, especially little pit bull puppies, to show more realistically what it's like. She's showing, she knows a lot of this escape conditioning, so that's why it's going to be easier to show the next steps in the other videos. And it's the same thing. You know, I have heel, you know, I show me walking around with her, you know, a little bit of heel. It's just they're in the position.
Good girl.
It's just once they're in the position, it's easy to give them a little bit of negative reinforcement once they come out of it. Heel, I think I do a little heel here.
Good girl. Darcy, free. Good girl.
And I only continue the lessons as long as the dog is willing to engage.
Heel. Good girl. Heel. Good girl. Heel. Good girl. Good
See, so if I want her, she was looking at poop. I had to clean up. She was sniffing at. But it gives you an idea that I'm not letting her get out of position. She knows what the heel position is. So I'm able to very easily give her an aversive to keep her right where I want her to be. Whether it's foraging, putting her head down, whatever we want. All right, this would all be considered escape conditioning for her. And then she's much more easier to get a duration out of her. All right. So, Art, you had a good question. Art says, in phase 1 leash manners, kind of sort of an intro to escape. No command, but when the dog pulls, you finger pump. Leash manners, that's a good question, Art. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter what you start off with because leash manners does not start in phase 2. All right? Leash manners, same thing, starts in phase 1. So everything's the same. You know, if you have a dog on the leash for the first time, you have a puppy, what you do is you reward the dog for being close to you, right? You're rewarding the dog for being close to you, and you could walk around the yard. You could reward the dog, whatever you're doing with it, and they just don't get a reward if they're at the end of the leash. But then once you want to teach the dog an aversive for leash manners, where if they do not do leash manners and they hit the end of the leash, you start the dog off as close as possible. And as soon as they move away from you, it's very easy. You don't let them get one step ahead in front of you before you do leash manners. And let me see, I can actually show, you know, since we're on here, I'll go show. It's on YouTube. I didn't bet it, just to give you an idea. A video that you can look up is, we give an example with with Judy here with Orfeo. We did a video on it. Let's see. Go back over here. I'm just getting all the advertisements off.
once
So-
to be fair to him. Do not is short, but
if you're doing phase 1, phase 2, this is Orfeo, leash, some just some leash manners. All right, same thing. If you had a dog, this is a dog. I mean, he's almost weighs as much as Judy, right? So the dogs. We teach the clients with their puppies and young dogs, just reward them when they're close like this. And you just do it on a regular flat collar. In his case, he's on a prong collar, which, yes, we know it's low. Everyone on YouTube, make sure that they make comments about that. But in reality, it didn't really matter. You know, if it's functioning. Here, we're showing how to do escape conditioning. Look, she understands Leash Ninja to make it easy. She has a finger pump. When he's in position, it's easier to teach the dog how to get back into position because we're only letting him take one step out of a good position. So then when she pumps, it is very easy to teach him what to do to break the tension on that leash. I think it happens here. I didn't go do any timestamps, but let's say.
because this is just leash manners, meaning we want the dog just to stay close, and he could do whatever he wants. He could sit, he could lie down, he could get comfortable, but we don't want him to make an effort on his own to step out and try dragging her anywhere or approaching someone that he's not supposed to approach unless she says that it's okay. Now, with this technique, if the leash gets tight at all, she can very easily help him by doing a little leash pump, which is in the Leash Ninja video. So she gives him a little pit, and she just pumps her hand, and it gives him just a little nudge to come closer to her. Then once she comes closer, she just gives him love. All right.
So it's very easy. I actually prefer to teach. I'll keep the volume down low there. I actually prefer to start teaching clients escape conditioning, yes, with leash manners, because they need to use the leash anyway for all the other exercises. And especially if you're in a group class situation, you want the dog to be able to stand next to the owner like this on a nice loose leash. So before, they're mostly just getting rewarded for being close to the clients. But now you make it easy. You don't want the dog to, do some like these walking exercises yet. You start off like this. This is so easy for the dog to figure out. She moves away from the dog a little bit, or he takes one step away. The leash pumps. And what happens is it's very easy to teach the dog, even just by patting your leg to have the dog to come closer, that we will remove the pump. And then that encourages the behavior of being on the loose leash, all right? So that's negative reinforcement. But you notice she's not going to give some big jerk or something like that. We're not focusing on positive punishment with something like this. If the dog is scared to move, you cannot teach them what to do with the pump, all right? So it's a process. And this is what a lesson would look like with a dog that's starting escape conditioning for maybe their first exercise. So normally what I would do in a lesson is someone knows how to handle the leash. They know how to do this exercise. I will then have them practice using their treats and doing the sits and downs, all phase one, but just making sure the dog stays close to them on the leash, and they can practice just leash manners like that, all right? So we ease them into it. So when the dog understands this is a horizontal, all right? It's easier for the dog to learn different movements. So escape conditioning, we're talking about training collars here. So when in phase two, it's leash exercises, and we're teaching the dogs concepts of punishment. We're not expecting the dog to be phenomenal around high distractions. We're being a teacher. We're being a teacher, and we're teaching them concepts. And this idea of teaching them concepts goes all the way back to even Conrad Most's book, all right? 100 years ago. And that concept, even him, is like, you do light, you're doing light aversives. How does he word? I forget what he calls calls aversives inside of his old book. But he basically says you're teaching the dog everything light. You don't want the dog to be scared of this stuff. They need to know when it comes. You need to be predictable. You're teaching them rules. So then later on, if you are training, you get hired to train a dog to do any behavior that is required around high level distractions, where the dog is truly disobeying, where the dog is gonna, you tell the dog to do something, you really need the dog to do something, like not run into the road, and the dog is deciding, okay, I know what to do, I know there's an aversive if I don't do it, but I think it's in my best interest to chase a squirrel, which is near this busy highway. At that point, when we go into true avoidance conditioning, where we want to teach the dog, when we give you a command, avoid all aversives, all right? Once you start increasing the level of aversion, you want the dog to immediately, if they decide, okay, I don't like that, I'd rather avoid that than chase after the squirrel, you don't want to be teaching them these rules at this time. What an ugly lesson that becomes. And what side effects? If you put your homework in and you're the teacher of the dog, even those lessons are smooth, all right? They're very smooth. Even things like teaching dogs invisible fence systems and things like that, all right? If you understand these concepts of teaching the dog things, you'll be surprised that you can teach the dog all the concepts they need, even on an invisible fence system, by putting tapes on on the prongs that give the dog electric stimulation, and teach them how to go inside the yard and what happens, and when you hear this, what you're supposed to do and what direction to go, and it's going to be good. So then when it comes down to it, the dogs generally get one high level aversive and they're like, oh, I know how to avoid it. I've gotten an aversive for going over here. It wasn't so bad. Now I really don't like it, but I know how to avoid it. I've seen this drill before, all right? And this is what the escape conditioning is about. It's something that's the responsibility for all professional trainers to really know. And it's like, you're going to get some people, because I like to put, these videos I put public. I think it has to be out there. And you'll get people who are going to even watch this video, because it's very easy to get likes, right, on videos. That's all about positive reinforcement. Some people watch the video like, oh, there's aversives, that's, you're abusive or stuff like that. These videos are for, remember, we're teaching cynopraxic training, all right? Our goal is simply to improve the life of the dog and the owner. If someone's a professional dog trainer and they know their stuff, all right? You want to know your phase one. You want to know your stuff before you touch this. If someone's working with a client and they can improve the life of the owner and the dog without doing this in the training, you're cynopraxic, you're Lima, you're being minimally aversive. I'm all for it, But if you feel like you got to take everything by a case-by-case basis, all right? If you're in a situation where you feel, all right, we leave self-righteousness at the door, and we think of the dog, we think of the owner, and if this sounds like we start adding this stuff and it's going to improve, it's going to make the dog's life safer, the owner's life safer, be less intrusive, meaning we're going to be less intrusive on the relationship. The owner doesn't have to leave the dog home as much. The dog could be out now more when there's guests over. They can cut the dog loose in the yard and play ball without having to worry about the dog jumping the fence or something like that. If it makes sense to you, all right, this, I promise you, if you study through phase one, through phase two, learn the command structures, all right, like, be technical. This is Lima. This is the least, if you're going to use it, this is designed to be true to Lima. All right. If you're a professional and you say that you're Lima, this is the way that you can use the minimal amount of aversive as possible with the dog and least intrusive. It's designed to have those quality checks in there. All right. You'll know The client will know if the dog doesn't want to engage with them anymore. You don't do another rep if the dog doesn't want to even engage with you. You know you have to tweak, all right? So there's a lot of quality control over there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, since this one's running, I knew this would be a little bit of a longer one. Let's do a recap over here, and then make sure we covered all this, and then I'll stick around. Looks like there's some more questions about this in our Pack Howl over here. Is objectives. What is escape conditioning? It's a process. It's the process of teaching the dog to an escape and aversive. Remember, it is not the same as negative reinforcement. You can have all 4 quadrants going on during the process, but be careful with the positive punishment, all right? If you are discouraging behavior and that seems to be the focus, we're not going to get enough reps for the dog to learn the negative reinforcement, all right? The focus is on the negative reinforcement, but you use, all right? That's why we have a whole, there's a lot of stuff going on over here, all right? In the escape conditioning. Conditioning is to learn. Escape is to escape, learning how to escape. That's what escape conditioning is. We want them to know how to escape before we teach them how to avoid things, to prevent panic. Why wait into phase 2 to teach it? One, of course, quality control, right? This is geared towards professional dog trainers. Someone's a pet person and they want to sit through all this stuff. That's really great, all right? But a lot of this stuff could be taught in layman's terms. And for your clients and for the dog's sake, right? You want them to know these lessons before they do this. And it just makes the training process enjoyable. If you're a professional dog trainer, if the client is not enjoying the lesson and the dog is not, if the client or the dog isn't enjoying the lesson, you're not as likely to get as many repeat lessons. And that's the difference. You will see some professional trainers, they're doing a lot of like quick programs, where they have a client for like 10 lessons or 2-week board and train or whatever. And they have to have these very, very strong marketing plans because they have a lot of they're doing a lot of, the clients don't stick around for what's next. All right. Someone comes for a leash pulling issue. And if the lesson solves the problem, but was really not that enjoyable, the client is less likely to be like, oh, what else can we do? This was so much fun. It's less likely to turn into a hobby. If you make it enjoyable, if you make the process enjoyable for your client, I promise you, I'm speaking from 28 years experience and teaching a bunch of other dog trainers. What happens is your clients stick around. They come for a reactivity issue on a leash. Next thing you know, you're doing agility with them and scent and tracking and dock diving and cart pulling, whatever. There's so many different things. Protection training, right? They love it. It's enjoyable. Like, oh, I didn't know that it does not have to be a miserable experience. So do the phase 1. It makes it easier. It makes it easier to teach the dog, and it makes you enjoy the training. All right, it makes you enjoy it. I don't know how many dog trainers I know that they get burnt out, all right? They get so stuck in cognitive dissonance where they're doing things that is not the way they expected with the dog, and they're not really enjoying it, and they're just making excuses of why you have to do this with the dog, where don't skip the steps, all right? The clients will enjoy it. They'll enjoy it. They'll stick around with you if you do the phase 2 first. And it's Lima, all right? You can be accurate. Great command structure, all right? We have the command structure here. It is not the same. I have seen people, this is common. I'm very flattered when trainers will watch some of the videos, like, oh, I know how to train foundation style dog training. And you'll see them do a lesson with their dog, and right away they're just doing the command structure. They didn't go through the process, and the dog is a little bit stressed out, all right? You build this, all right? You start off with this in phase 1. In phase 2, it looks like this. Know there's different command structures. Don't do things in the command structure that the dog does not know yet. Not have the dog try to figure this all out. The dog's not going to be able to figure this out, just like you're not going to be able to figure this out in one lesson. Do a night. It's actually very easy if you do a little checkbox with the dog. All right. When can you move from the escape conditioning? You can go. We'll do next week. You can move to the next step, which is so exciting and gives us even more communication. When you see the dog, whatever it is you want the dog to learn about the aversive, how to escape it, when you see the dog smoothly and confidently, without any stress signals, just you do the aversive and the dog just does it and is ready to keep training, you're ready to go to the next step, all right? And it's not, if you do it right, it's quickly. A lot of these exercises, it's one session and the dog figures it out and you're moving on to the next steps, even in the same lesson often, all right? So it's better to go into each lesson with a client and think of it as, how many mini lessons am I going to teach this client? It's not, we're just going to do escape conditioning today, right? I like using checklist systems and where are we with each, with each. And if the dog, if they're good with their phase one, the dog is enjoying the training. Escape conditioning for something like a sit is like that. The dog's figured out really, really quickly, and then they could, teach them condition punisher, or it's something like the climb command or something like that. You'll see some things are really easy and it's like, you could just move on. If the client can handle it, the dog can handle it. You'll be surprised how many mini lessons you move faster by breaking it down into very easy little pieces. All right. Little pieces, more mini lessons, better for quality control, smoother lessons. It works. You break it down so it works for all dogs. I'm telling you, break it down. I've done everything. The most aggressive dogs you could think of. I even trained a wolf doing it like this. A wolf that bit that hurt the handler because she was trying to skip steps. And this work, I promise you can train just about, I've never been able to not train a dog by breaking it down. It's designed for that. It's designed for someone hires you, you have a contract, you need it to be done, you need it to be done in front of people. You can't go just lock the doors. It's not results. It's result. You get the results, but it's also process orientated. The process is super, super important. It is very, very important, especially if you're doing private lessons, group classes, anything. Yes, I guess there was a lot of things over here. All right, and you know what some examples look like. Let me see. Before I go, I think there was some more stuff over here. Let me see. It's how important is it? Or it says, how is important in phase one to completely eliminate, always for every dog, all the time, body language. So dogs obeys only on the verbal. I do that, but sometimes use body language, prompt. And once dog is trained up off leash, or even in the real world, when the dog on, I like to use body language instead. Okay, so for this question, Art's question is basically, before you go into, let me go back over here. Before you go into the phase two, how important is it to fade off body language for the command? It is important to fade off some things you may not, it depends on you and what you expect the dog to respond to for the command. So for example, something like down. I don't want to have to point to the ground to tell a dog to do down. I may be carrying stuff or whatever. So if the dog does not understand the word down, you're going to make it a lot more difficult for the dog to, one, you're going to make it more difficult for the dog to understand the help when you're doing the escape conditioning. Noticing with those dogs we were doing the escape condition, as we were pumping, we're telling the dog what to do, right? We're telling them what to do. We're telling them the word down. If they know it as the body language, your voice, you're not going to be able to really help much. And then it's going to run into problems when we do the avoidance conditioning. If we want the dog to go down on one word when we're standing up, they're never going to be able to avoid it because they don't know what the word means, right? But if we're talking about something like a place where I always point to where I want the dog to go, since I have multiple places, you don't have to fade off the body language for that, right? Because it's going to be combined with the point. So you want the dog, you just basically want to fade off any prompts that you use so that when you get here, whatever the cue is, it's the one that you're going to be expecting them to obey to avoid any type of aversive. And then remember here, and this is the point I probably didn't drive home, is in our command structure, we're saying the command another time during the command structure here. And we talked about this right away, like in the ratio lecture, is that when we say the dog's name is always safe. Still remember, when you say that dog's name, there's never any type of correction. We say the dog's name, immediately anything that follows is the dog gets a chance to do it. If they don't do it at this stage, nothing happens. All right? It's only once they're in the command that if they mess up, do not say their name and correct at the same time. Because then this is not predictable. The name stops being predictable for the dog. I want to make sure we drive that home. You don't want the dog to ever think when they hear their name, a punishment is coming right afterwards or correction of any type. It could make it harder for the dog to concentrate and listen and cause them to jump the gun and other side effects like poison commands, like they act like they get punished even though nothing was there. Only say the dog's name if you're giving them a chance to respond to something afterwards. Here, when the dog breaks, we're calmly saying the command to help to let them understand what they're supposed to be doing as we give them the aversive. And they're able to know this prevents poisoned commands, we call it, all right? Poisoned commands, when you give a dog initial command and they act, they become, it's classical conditioning. They act as if they're getting corrected, all right? And that's when you see someone, classic is you see someone tells the dog, like sit, and the dog's name, sit, and they like jump like that, all right? They think that the aversive is right there, or they tell the dog down, the dog like goes like, say the dog's name, tell the dog down, the dog goes like that. This helps prevent it too. So remember, this command structure is here for, everything should make sense that the dog is able to learn something. All right. So let's see. Judy says a good way to proof escape conditioning with the pumps after. That's a good way to proof escape conditioning with the pumps after you teach it. Oh, Arthur says, in my opinion, with limited experience, you got to teach a lot of clients what to look for is going on with the dog, how to read the dog, and to realize that most of the time Fido's not blowing you off, being disobedient, etc. Likely he doesn't understand. Yes, Art. All right. Disobedience, especially when you have that engagement. That's why that phase 1 is important. During this teaching process, it is very rare the dog understands what you told them and they're saying, oh, you know what? I'm going to just blow off my handler because I want to be disobedience. I want to show them who's boss or something like that. It's almost always what we call false disobedience. They either do not know the rules yet or they're confused, all right? You got to troubleshoot. That's why the phase 1 is important. You've got to be troubleshooting. Does the dog even know what the command means, all right? Like if the dog, you tell the dog down and it doesn't go down, does the dog even really know what the word down means? Or are they relying on the fact that they usually look at your face and you bob your head when you say down? You have to be able to look at these things, all right? And also, even we saw a little clip of that little pit bull. I was jumping ahead where I told the dog, told him down, and then he just stood there. We didn't teach the dog avoidance condition yet. Then I went down, I pumped the pit bull. There was nothing taught to the dog that he has to go down at that point. I was doing escape conditioning. The dog was only taught at that point in the training that if you go down, you get a reward, all right? You get a treat. If you don't go down, you just don't get a treat. And it's an indicator that the dog is not interested in the lesson anymore at that point in the training session. Not indicator that the dog wants to disobey. We did not even teach that pit bull in that video that that he was supposed to at that point. All right. There was nothing in there that said, okay, if you don't do it, now here comes an aversive. And ultimately, what we want, right, is we want to teach the dog is that if you obey, good things are going to continually happen. I have your best interests in mind. It's going to always lead to something good. All right. And then we do want to teach them that also you do have to listen. But if your focus is, if you want them to mostly be doing it, which is very easy to do because you have their best interest in mind, it's the aversive parts you'll see. You can see with our protection training videos and stuff like that. It's minimal. It truly becomes help. It steers them right back on track really easy. And you could use minimum levels, all right? You could use very, very minimal levels of aversives, and it steers them back on track. That's what it's supposed to be. Anytime a trainer is using lots of aversives, especially with the dog that they consider polished, they really got to rethink what's going on over there, and they got to troubleshoot it. So that's what it's about. They got to think cynopraxically. Is this dog enjoying the training? Is the dog enjoying the time with me? And am I considering his needs and his happiness and stuff like that? And when you consider the dog, you do end up getting better obedience, which then makes your life better, the client's life happier, everything like that. So much to consider, but I should wrap this one up. We're gonna continue on this subject. It's a lot, but escape conditioning does not get enough attention, in my opinion. The breakdown, all right? The breakdown of it. Matter of fact, there's a lot of schools that just don't even talk about it, for sure. I know for a fact, all right? So study escape conditioning. And I'll stay in Pack Howell for a little bit after I shut off the stream. Otherwise, we're going to continue with our condition punishers next stream.